thinking I'd like to make about this notion of infrastructure. We just went through the WSIS, as any of you who know, who actually study this area, a 10-year look back at what happened when the governments of the world got together and said, by the way, I think we better leave this thing alone. We don't understand it. We don't know what it is. So why don't we just see what it does? Basically, that's what that was about. And in those 10 years, they said, this thing does a lot. And sometimes we don't like what it does, and sometimes we do like what it does. And so we'll have a big meeting and decide whether we like this thing or not. And over months and months, there was the kind of cooperative, collaborative conversation that has become very much the part of the internet. However, it was at the UN, which is closed, frankly, to other stakeholders. This is a governmental organization, but which tried very hard to open it up. At the very last minute, of course, when the text is to be decided, however, the door is closed. The door is closed. And this notion that is central to the internet and what it is about, that it is transnational in its nature and its properties, somehow got diluted. Somehow got diluted overnight. And herein lies the challenge of the next 10 years. This notion that there's a sovereignty issue with respect to the way and how the governance of the internet must take place is one that we have to give deep, deep thought about, and to understand how the very properties and nature of the internet do or do not conform with notions of borders. So in the WSIS statement, and I'll read it to you, I stood at the UN and actually said thank you to all for the work that was done. This was a victory of sorts, and said the following. And I read it here because I believe it's important. Of course, we all know that the outcome document reflects a series of compromises, and we have a concern, and it is not an insignificant one. In our view, the outcome statement falls short in failing to fully recognize the transnational nature of the internet as a borderless network of networks comprised of millions of individual networks that connect around the globe. It seeks to apply national solutions to global problems, particularly those related to safety and security. This shortfall is compounded by an unfortunate misbelief by some that cooperation only among governments is sufficient to solve problems that require the expertise and commitment of all of us. This statement illuminates the work of the Internet Society at this point. We have, we believe, gained much in the last 10 years, and we have much to lose. So let me just say, let's see where my minutes are, what I believe where we need to focus. And that is on the invariance that Laura has already talked about, the nature of the internet. The internet is our building blocks, that one and the other build new things, that where innovation is permissionless, where the notion that it connects everywhere, any place, is core to its existence, and where there is indeed no central planning. There's no central planning. So what that means for governance in a distributed ecosystem, and it is an ecosystem, means that we have to have different forms of governance. And as Fiona said, multi-stakeholder is not a religion, it's not an ism, it is a way and a process by which we think about cooperation and collaboration in a complex ecosystem. We now have the real challenge, in my view, of putting some meat on those bones. How does this actually work in the real world? How do we actually bring those interests that need to come to the table on any particular issue, not on every issue all at the same time, but on any particular issue, whether it be local or global, how do we bring those interests to the table so we have actual deliberative cooperation, not consultation, but actual deliberative decision-making on things that are vitally important to the ongoing use, innovation, and development of the internet. And I'll end with this, that this is where we have to spend our time, because those nations of the world who say this is never work, can't work, it's too hard, we've got to do something else, will indeed go down a different path, which will have very different consequences. I'm not calling for the end of the world, but I am calling and saying that the consequences of the way and how this infrastructure actually grows and develops will be decided by these decisions we make now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Kathy has raised a charge to us and raised some very serious challenges. Our third speaker, I think, will build well on this. Our third speaker is Emma Llansó. Emma comes to us as director of the Free Expression Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. She has had a long history working on human rights as it relates to internet policy and rights of children and youth. Emma is also an attorney, and she received her Juris Doctor from Yale University. She came to the Center for Democracy and Technology and was their Bruce Ennis First Amendment Fellow when she began her work there. But she also has a fascinating fact, and an interesting theme is emerging here. And the fascinating fact for Emma is that Emma first learned about internet governance from none other than our wonderful colleague, Professor Laura DeNardis, when Professor DeNardis was, of course, at the Yale Law School. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Emma. We have great network connections here.
Great. Thank you so much, Nanette, and to Derrick and Laura for the opportunity to speak with you all here today. So at Center for Democracy and Technology, so much of our work around freedom of expression online and individuals' ability to enjoy their rights to free speech online focuses on questions of information intermediaries, which is a big theme in this book. What are the laws and policies that regulate information intermediaries, and how do the policies that those intermediaries create affect our abilities to access information and speak our minds online? And so I thought today we'd talk a little bit about some of the reasons why we're seeing this turn to infrastructure in internet governance. And in a lot of ways, it really comes down to this question that has bedeviled internet policy and internet governance from the very beginning, the question of jurisdiction. What are the circumstances under which a state can speak the law, can apply its laws to activity that happens on the internet? Government attempts to assert jurisdiction are what kind of brings the activity of cyberspace back down to earth. And one of the easiest ways for a government to make the case that it has jurisdiction over activity happening online is to target infrastructure, to say there is equipment, there are wires, there are servers in the borders of our country, very much this cyber sovereignty argument that Kathy was saying. There is physical architecture here in our country, and that means that we, the country, have jurisdiction over the activity that that infrastructure supports. One of the earliest cases in kind of global internet policy that probably many of the students here are very familiar with is the case of Lycra versus Yahoo, which was a question about in the turn of the millennium, Yahoo had an auction site that allowed people to put up for auction all sorts of materials, including, in some cases, people were posting Nazi memorabilia online that others could buy for whatever purpose they might have for buying that. It is unlawful in France to sell Nazi memorabilia. Against the law, they've decided that that's just not something that should be available for sale in France. And the question was, if this material is available for sale in France from a company based in the United States, which courts have the ability to say whether this is all right or not? And so a group that fights against racism and anti-Semitism in France brought a case in French courts, and French courts decided that because Yahoo knew that people in France were accessing its site, because ads in the French language would be displayed when a computer with an IP address that appeared to be from France accessed Yahoo's site, that was a sufficient contact between Yahoo, the company, to the nation of France for France's laws to apply. And the French court said, you can't sell this kind of material in our country because it's a violation of our laws. Yahoo asked a U.S. court to take a look at this question, to say, we're a U.S. company, U.S. laws, the First Amendment, prohibits this kind of restriction on sale of memorabilia, sale of material related to the Nazi Party. A U.S. court, the Ninth Circuit, ended up finding that there was not sufficient contact between the defendants in this case, the group that was fighting against racism in France. There was not sufficient contact between that group and the United States for a U.S. court to be able to weigh in. And so you had two different kinds of jurisdiction questions looked at by two different courts coming to two different results. In the end of the day, the answer was French law applies in France, according to French courts, when people in France are accessing this service. And that has the sort of messy history there has really been sort of the theme as jurisdiction questions have played out on the internet over the subsequent 15 years. These questions come up time and again particularly in the question of freedom of expression, because what we have with our globally connected network is the opportunity for a person in one country to publish information online that is potentially immediately accessible in every nation on the planet. But nations on the planet have some very different ideas about what kind of speech is lawful and unlawful. And this is from variation as extreme as countries with anti-blasphemy laws or laws against criticizing the king or the ruler of the country. But it comes up in questions not just in countries like China or Saudi Arabia or Turkey, but in countries like France and the United Kingdom, dealing with this question of how do nations of the world respond when we have a global sort of platform for speech. One good example of this recently has been, and seeing this issue play out, has been around the right to be forgotten discussion that's going on in Europe. So this, the right to be forgotten generally is this kind of concept that people's privacy and dignity rights depend to some extent on their ability to retract information that's been made public about them from public debate, that you have a reputation that you should be able to manage and maintain, and that there may be information that is true and public about you, but that no longer pertains to who you are as a person. And this, we see this reflected in laws all over the world, not just in Europe. In the US, we have laws around sealing juveniles' criminal records, or in our Fair Credit Reporting Act statute, we talk about how, or it provides that information about previous bankruptcies or other things that are negative about your credit, after a while that comes out of your credit report. So it's not a completely foreign concept, but the application that we're seeing in Europe is starting to implicate internet infrastructure as well. So there was a kind of philosophical discussion about this, and the discussion coming up in the context of the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. But then there is the case Google versus Mario Casteja Gonzalez, a case where a man in Spain wanted to see information about a 17-year-old, I think, tax lien on his house, to have that stop showing up in search results based on his name. This was reviewed by the Court of Justice of the European Union, who concluded a couple of things that were pretty important. They concluded that a search engine indexing information on the public web was engaged in data processing of the sort that's covered by European data protection law. So being a company that is indexing information published to the web, it makes you covered by this data protection law, which had not been necessarily clear before this case. But I think one of the fundamental kind of questions or not a question, they decided this, problems with the court opinion was that it essentially called into question whether, if information is true, public, and lawfully posted on the web, it may still, under the terms of this decision, be unlawful for someone to link to it. And this is a pretty dramatic finding, actually. The public web sort of founded on these ideas that if you publish something to the web. It's public, it's not behind a password protection, there's no other technical effort to keep it shielded, then that information is there to be linked to. It's there to be connected to. This is sort of the great innovation of the web. Now in Europe, as a result of this case, there is some uncertainty about that. It may be the case that a newspaper has completely lawfully published its archives online. The information that it contained in those articles is true, it's not defamatory, it's not otherwise unlawful, and yet, in some cases, for a search engine to link to those old results may make that search engine in violation of a data protection law. So this is, I think, a great example of how application of the law in a country or a region like Europe to the web is showing us some tensions between how courts and countries want their laws to apply and the kind of the technical nature of how information flows and is accessible online. And I think I'm running up toward the end of time. All right, so there's any number of other things that we could talk about, but I'll just say that the questions like this of how courts and how laws, which are designed to protect fundamental rights of individuals, designed to protect our privacy rights or to support our right to freedom of expression, are increasingly being applied to the internet and in ways that are not necessarily coherent with the way the technology works. So I'm really excited to see this book from Laura and Derrick and Nanette because these are some of the most important questions, and having some really thoughtful discussion of how to think about these problems and hopefully how to come to some solutions is incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Emma. And I'm delighted now that our virtual co-author, the fantastic Francesca Musiani, is going to be joining us, I believe, now. Are you there, Francesca?
She's there. She's not coming on. She's just there.
Okay, we'd like to welcome you. We're delighted that you're there. And at this point in the program, I wanted to thank Emma for highlighting in her concluding remarks here on the panel tensions and uncertainties. And I think that gives way to an opportunity for us to actually open up the floor for discussion and questions. So I would like to take about 3 questions, and then the panelists can answer those questions. And I'd like to ask anyone who has a question to line up at the center microphone, identify yourself, your organization, and please state a brief and pithy question for the panel. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Please come, please.
Hi, thanks for a really riveting discussion so far. I'd be curious to, I'm Aram Sinreich, I'm a professor here at American University School of Communication. I'd be curious to hear you talk about the role of DRM in the next generation of HTML and what the implications for free speech and sovereignty are in that.
Please.
My name is Iya Basu. I'm a master's student at School of Communication here at KEYNOTE. My question is really much more immediate on the WhatsApp encryption that happened a few days back. My question is, while it does provide some encryption for the data, but what kind of identity issues are not yet taken care of, and how does that protect individuals from the kind of government surveillance?
Thank you. Let's start with those 2 questions, and anyone in the panel can sort of jump in and answer them.
So I'm not an expert on sort of the technical data rights management stuff and also the HTML and things like that. So I think I will defer and not answer those questions. I'll just get myself in trouble, I think, if I say anything.
Would you like to answer?
I mean, if there's a particular issue, or I'm sorry, I don't know where the person asking the question went. Oh, there. Sorry. Yes, yeah. Just, I mean, spell that out a little bit more for us. Give the background.
Could you come to the microphone just so that our live streaming, and we thank the Internet Society very much and the School
Sure.
of International
Thanks, Jolly.
Service for live streaming.
Little shout out to Jolly McPhee, who's sitting there somewhere tinkering on a laptop. Sure, DRM, digital rights management technology, which for those of you who are not super nerds about this stuff, it's a kind of encryption envelope that surrounds information and makes it accessible only to those who have the password. And it's been employed with some degree of controversy by the content industries as a way to establish kind of artificial windows over time and space when their content is released onto digital networks. And historically, DRM has not only been used to exclude people from access to knowledge in a way that is problematic from a human rights standpoint, but it's also contributed to toxic relationships between media organizations and audiences because it requires permanent maintenance of the permission servers in order for consumers to have access to the media that they've already purchased. And there have been very high-level examples where, for instance, digital streaming music services or download services have sold goods to people that have then become inaccessible afterwards because they reneged on their commitment to continue making those content available. Now, that's a problem in a one-to-one relationship between a media company and a given customer, but when that functionality is integrated into the core language of the web, into HTML itself, the problem becomes that you get this, you have the social potential for an ultra balkanized public sphere where only certain subsets of the user base are getting access to large swaths of the information that's posted. And the default becomes restriction rather than openness. And I'm sure all of you on the panel would agree that the web would not have become the web in the first place had the platform not defaulted to openness. So what I'm interested in is broader issues of access to knowledge, engineering differentiations between those wealthy enough to gain access to content and those not wealthy enough, the kind of network effects that come from not having a default open platform. Is this something that's addressed in the book? Is it something that's on your radar?
Kathy, would you like to answer
So
that? I
don't
think
you
it's
love when the
perfect.
professor actually has all of, he's really done a great job of framing the issue and actually sort of saying, when here's all of the things that are implicated by it. I think this is the tension, right, between an open public space, internet, and the proprietary kind of applications that we're starting to see that also are on the internet. It is classic in a, if you will, a mature market like we have here in the United States, and maybe not as relevant in some of the other places in the world on its face. It seems not relevant, but the issue becomes, do we move from an open standards kind of environment to one where things are proprietary? I think this is an issue that we need to think about seriously in a little different context that I'll put on the table to provoke one more time. And that is, we see that the platform for internet access in many parts of the world will be a wireless platform. And if there is one platform that holds these kind of proprietary applications like that, you will see it there because it grew up differently. And I think this presents a challenge and an opportunity for us to start to think this through and to have those kind of collaborative conversations that I believe we need to have with not only governments, right, but with people who are innovating, who are creating, who have some legitimate issues around guarding their own creation, right? We know that. We know that there's people who steal stuff, and so they'd like it not to be stolen. But on the other hand, is this really thwarting innovation or helping it? And I think you've raised the right questions. And I'm not going to say that we actually have an answer yet, because I don't think we do. But I think this is one of the areas where we have to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question for pointing out that this technology is not necessarily open, is not necessarily, I think as we saw in the early days of the commercial internet and the increasing global scope of it, there was this sense that the internet would be an inherently democratizing force, that it would the proliferation of the network would bring democracy to all nations of the world just because it was so open. And it was a beautiful vision, and there's so much of that potential in the technology, but it's not guaranteed. And it actually takes a lot of concerted effort and specific decision making to keep the technology open, to make sure that we don't just turn this network into kind of opt-in mass government surveillance of every detail of our lives. And so I think it's also a great question about kind of the relationship between theory and concept that we've had in an area like copyright law, where, you know, in the US we have something called the first sale doctrine on physical material. You know, now that I have wonderfully provided by AU a copy of this book, it's mine to do with what I please, right? I could give it to a friend. I could donate it to a library. I could resell it. I could set it on fire. I'm not going to do that, but I could. You know? And there's no, I promise. And there's nothing that the authors of the book or the publishers of the book really have to say about that. The huge difference in digital media is that there are technically ways for the publishers to keep their hooks in the instance of the media that I own. And some of that, you know, the motivation there is that it's so much easier for me to make a digital copy of something that's already digital than to digitize this book. I also have a PDF of this book that Laura thankfully provided to me, and that would be way easier for me to turn into 1 billion copies to share with everybody. But I think I sort of want to just draw lessons from how we've actually seen the DRM around copyright kind of play out in the US, where there were very many examples of DRM gone wrong when the kind of orientation of the content industry was lock down the individual file, make sure that that person has one copy and cannot do anything else with it. And that raised a lot of problems. What we've seen in the past few years is a lot more innovation in different ways for content industry to distribute media in ways that still gets the, you know, the monetary remuneration that they as rights holders are entitled to, but that isn't featured around trying to lock down any individual file. It's innovation in streaming services, licensing deals with a variety of platforms, everything from Spotify to Netflix, as ways to make it easy for people to access the content, because that's what the user draw was, but that doesn't bring along with it necessarily all of the problems of trying to create a inviolable digital file through heavy use of DRM. So I'd point to that as kind of an interesting object lesson as we think about these broader questions that Kathy's talking about, because our first instinct of what to do with the technology and how to achieve a policy goal is not always the right one.
All right, if I briefly follow up? Or?
Very quick, very quick.
Just to support your point that this is not purely a governmental issue, the U.S. Copyright Office recently published a white paper where they basically said the digital first sale doctrine is too complex for us to figure out, and so we're just going to leave it off the table for now. And that's highly problematic. So it has to be addressed, I think, at the technological level, not at the sovereignty level.
With that, I'm going to take my prerogative as the moderator for the panel to ask a concluding question. Colleagues, we're here at American University, the School of International Service and the School of Communication. And in our audience, we have wonderful faculty colleagues, wonderful students, wonderful alums, and distinguished visitors. What would be your recommendations to today's students and also to faculty for educating, not training, but educating the next generation of Kathy's and Fiona's and Emma's and others in this policy space?
Go ahead. You're the AU student.
We'll do it in the order in which you spoke. How about that? We'll do that.
So I think, look, there's lots of different things to do and say here. I think the one thing to keep in mind is that it's important to keep in touch with the people that you meet in school, right? It's important to build those networks. It's important to pick a topic or two and dive deep into those topics and develop some subject matter expertise. I would say don't limit yourself by doing that. Make sure you're still open to other kinds of things. And it's important to keep engaging and keep reading. I mean, the one benefit and beauty of all these internet governance conversations, yes, you can get on a lot of airplanes and participate in them, but there's a lot of remote participation now, thanks to Derrick and others and all the work that they've done. So that there's nothing prohibiting you from participating in any of these conversations, whether they're here at AU or in DC or internationally, other than your own time limitations. So I think that's what would be my observation.
Kathy?
I think the internet is a network of technology and of people, and increasingly of cultures. And it's a phenomenal phenomena. As I have the distinct honor and privilege of running around the world, having maybe too much time on an airplane, but getting to meet people in every place who want this technology for their lives and their communities and their economies and their children, who see this as an enormous benefit and a lift to lives that they are living and want to deepen, not necessarily change, by the way, deepen and not necessarily change. To learn this area, I agree wholly with Fiona that one has to learn some things and learn them deeply, understand this technology. You really do need to understand it before we go off and decide what to do about it. And number two, however, is to understand why people want to use it. And in order to do that, you have to get out of the classroom. You have to get out of your own sort of comfort zone and go and find out and listen and learn and find out and walk the walk and understand what is going on in this world. We can bring these levels, this conversation up so high that we miss the real sort of miracle of what this technology honestly can do and its potential.
And I'd say I complete agreement with Fiona and Kathy. And after, once you've done the in-depth research, once you've figured out, developed subject matter expertise and figured out, why do people care so much about this technology, then I would recommend be creative. These are some incredibly difficult questions that we're all facing, and some of the most difficult questions, whether it's what to do about content regulation online and the relationship between private content platforms and governments using those platforms to censor speech, or questions about what to do about incredibly strong encryption and the kinds of limits that puts on law enforcement and intelligence access to information. These are not easy questions, and there aren't super obvious answers to the nitty-gritty policy questions that we're all dealing with. So if you've got an idea, even if it seems a little bit off the beaten track or it seems like something that hasn't necessarily been done before, don't shy away from it. Investigate it, put it out there, get people involved in discussion about it, because we need creative thinking to figure out how to respond as people who want to respect the rule of law and respect the human rights of internet users around the world. We need creative thinking to figure out how to do that.
I thank, on behalf of my colleagues, the three of you for not only incredibly inspiring remarks, but for the charge you've given all of us and our students here today. Please join me in thanking our panelists. I also have the very special pleasure of introducing the cleanup hitter today of our speakers, who is an incredible colleague of mine who actually exemplifies some of the things that each of you highlighted in your remarks and your hopes for the future. Creativity, networks, knowledge niche, or content. It is a delight to introduce Professor Derrick Cogburn. I worked with Derrick before he came to American University. We collaborated. He was both at the University of Michigan and then at Syracuse University. He has been a pioneer in so many aspects of the internet, as well as in the domain that we write about in our co-edited book, and also the domain that we're going to be writing about in our new book, and you'll soon learn a bit about that from Derrick. Currently, Derrick serves as the executive director and founding director of an incredibly innovative institute here at American University and an SIS, the Institute on Disability and Public Policy. And as a part of that, he has forged the first ever network of 20 universities, primarily from the ASEAN region, all committed to inclusive higher education, and all linked, in fact, very, very creatively by his pioneering work on collaboration on the internet. I could just go on talking about his leadership positions over the years. I want to mention, though, some of his very pioneering work in our space. Derrick's earliest work, even before I met him, was actually in Africa. He served as the founding director of the Center for Information Society Development in Africa. He taught at WITS, the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He was also the founding regional director for the Africa Global Information Infrastructure Commission, as we used to know it as the GIIC. Here and now, he is also, in addition to his professorial teaching and researching responsibilities, the editor of the Paul Grade Macmillan book series on information technology and global governance. And we are very proud to have our book as a part of that series. But most of all, he truly is an inspiration to all of us. He has facilitated so much cross-national collaboration creatively, the things that each of you have called for today. So with that, it is just a delight to welcome to the floor and to the podium Professor Derrick Cogburn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nanette. That was a very kind and generous introduction. I have to say I was enjoying just sitting in the audience and listening to the wonderful conversation. There's nothing that I have to say here. Thank you all for coming out. This is a milestone for us. As Laura said, we started talking about this book some time ago. In fact, even before Bali, there was a conference over at Georgetown where Francesca, our remote colleague, was a fellow, a Yahoo fellow, and pulled together a really interesting conference. And Nanette and Laura and I were all there, and we thought this is a really good opportunity to start thinking about these issues and to think about putting them forward in a book. And it was in Bali where we decided, let's do this and let's move forward. So I'm glad we were able to finally get to this point. And I was delighted to be able to host the book in our series. The series has two different strands. The series is Information Technology and Global Governance. And there are two strands. So one is the global governance of information technology, so telecommunications, information technology, internet governance, and also the use of information technology for global governance, so in environment or human rights areas. So those of you that are authors and scholars yourselves, we're looking for more monographs. We plan to do 4 books per year. We also have some alternative vehicles like the Palgrave Pivot, which allows for rapid peer review and production in an electronic format and print on demand. So please keep in mind the series as you think about outlets for your work. So I want to talk a little bit about the future, new turns in internet governance. So the book really covers a wide spectrum of topics. And as Laura said in her introduction, we start by sort of framing some of the NSA surveillance disclosures that came with the Snowden revelations. We talked about some of the responses to those revelations with currently President Dilma Rousseff, might not be for long, but currently President Dilma Rousseff, who challenged the world and said that as a result, the U.S., she claimed, had violated international law with these revelations, and in the General Assembly, she called for a conference that would address these issues, and that's what led to the Net Mundial conference, but it also led to a lot of discussions about the principles and the values and the norms around governing the internet. And the UK actually also, and the European Union, really responded as well. And after that, Fiona and her colleagues issued a challenge to the world to say, well, we will turn over some of these critical functions if there's a new body that can be created, and sort of challenge the world to create it. And one of the new trends going forward is the fact that that process has happened now. Some of the core functions that my colleagues have been talking about are called the IANA functions. This, I won't get into the weeds. I've been warned not to get too far into the weeds. But the very critical function of managing and governing the process of domain names and numbers and the linkage between those is now poised to be transferred to a new global body that has been developed out of a very transparent, open IANA functions transition process. There's been a tremendous degree of consensus around what this new body should look like in the various communities that will contribute to this body. And so one of the things to watch for is what happens with this IANA transition. There have been hearings on Capitol Hill. And so what happens once this process completes and starts to function, as I think it was Kathy that was saying, there's an opportunity for all of you to get involved in that process. There's an opening for you to participate in these discussions and deliberations. Another key issue that we're facing that a couple of the panelists have alluded to is internet fragmentation or universality. We benefit from having an internet that we can pick up any of our devices, our tablets and our smartphones, and connect with any other person anywhere in the world, any computer anywhere in the world that's connected to the internet. We benefit from that stability and that reach. What happens if that changes and you can't reach somebody in Russia or China? Or there are other types of walled gardens that make it difficult to be able to access information that you might want to have access to. So this potential of internet fragmentation at a political level, an economic level, a technological level exists, and we have to watch that. We have to guard against that. We also have to think about human rights and internet freedom. What happens as we are being tracked and monitored? All of our conversations that have moved to technological spaces are being possibly captured and shared. More importantly, perhaps the expansion of the multi-stakeholder model. Fiona sort of started us off by talking about how important this multi-stakeholder model is. That's certainly not completely universal. It's something I certainly agree in, and a lot of my work is focused on understanding how this multi-stakeholder model can work. Again, not because it's a religion, but because the voices that can be heard from this multi-stakeholder model are critical. And how do we enable both access to these processes, and there are lots of technologies that make access possible, but how do we build capacity? You know, Kathy was talking about this, about we could raise the level of this conversation pretty quickly to the fact that it would lose, I don't know exactly who everybody's here, but it would lose the vast majority of people in the audience. And so how do we build capacity so that not only do multiple groups have access to the process, they can go to the meetings and sit in virtually or physically, but how can they contribute to the process, and how can they contribute to decision-making in that process? The Internet of Things, big data analytics. I do a lot of work on big data analytics and text mining, so we know how much data about us is available and the kind of aggregation that can, the aggregate picture that can be put together when we aggregate that data. And as we move to the Internet of Things, where our refrigerators and our scales and our house alarms and our all of these things are connected by the internet generating data and generating data about us. These are critical issues. Stability and security, obviously issues that are important, critically important. Cybersecurity, we have a new cybersecurity center here on campus. And so these are all issues that we want to focus on. And I'll just say, lastly about the future is the development and accessibility issues and the next billion. So we had a workshop in João Pessoa about reaching the next billion through accessible technologies. And it's critically important as we think about there are more than 1 billion people in the world living with some form of disability. And so when we have a meeting, you know, Maya and I make sure that we have closed captioning. We're using a technology that if a person was using a screen reader, they would be able to access this process. Low bandwidth users can access these technologies. That's important to us, and those are important principles as we go forward. So what's the future of our work together in the future of the Internet Governance Lab? We want to continue building on our AU 2030 project that Provost Scott Bass launched. Laura, Nanette, and I came together to launch the Internet Governance Lab and as part of our AU 2030 project, but we want to broaden that out. We want to reach across campus to all of our colleagues, our faculty colleagues, our students, our staff that are interested in these areas, but we also want to reach into DC. All of our colleagues that are here in DC, in New York, and around the world to continue to position AU in this critical area. We also, all of us are incredibly busy. And so we all have our own projects that are going on in this area. Laura serves as the director of the Commission on Internet Governance, Director of Research for the Commission on Internet Governance. She has a whole range of work that she's doing around the world. Nanette is doing incredibly interesting research on the role of international organizations and the role that they play as they contest for leadership positions in Internet governance. I'm doing work on transnational advocacy networks and the way in which civil society groups organize themselves around the world to take advantage of some of these spaces that have opened up for them. So we have our individual projects, but we're trying to aggregate that here at American University because we want doctoral students to work with us. We want master's students like Ash to work with us. We want to attract postdocs to come here at American University to work with us. We also want to continue our work with GigaNet. All three of us have served in senior leadership positions in the Global Internet Governance Academic Network. This is the oldest academic association focused on internet governance. It's now in its 11th year. We just celebrated, as we did in Jean Pessoa, the 10th anniversary of GigaNet. And so we want to continue working with GigaNet and get more of our colleagues, interdisciplinary colleagues, technology-oriented colleagues, legal scholars, policy-oriented scholars, to work with us in GigaNet. We want to continue our capacity building initiatives, both online and face-to-face. And American University serves as a tremendously valuable resource in that process. Look at the colleagues that we have right here in DC. They didn't have to fly in to come to Syracuse to see us. They were right here. And so, that's an inside joke. And so we want to continue that. We want to take advantage of this space that we have here in Washington, D.C. at American University. We want to start preparing for the 11th Internet Governance Forum in Guadalajara, Mexico in December. We want to make proposals and recommendations. And we also need funding for the work that we're doing. So we're going to be looking for funding, but we want all of you to be involved. And the way that you can get involved, there are multiple ways to get involved, but one key way is Nanette alluded to our next big project. So the four of us have worked so well together on this project that we have decided to launch a new project looking at internet governance research methodologies, because there are a range of issues that all of us are pointing to, but how do we uncover those issues? And so there are different multidisciplinary, multi-method ways to get at some of these issues. Just one key example, I think I saw Robert Guerra here earlier. Is he still here? So Robert has done extremely interesting work, for example, working with Ron Diebert on filtering. And so looking at filtering of the internet in certain countries. So Laura, you probably remember in Bali, Ron did this report on how the internet that we were using in Bali was being filtered if we weren't using the official IGF website, internet access. So we want to have an edited volume that's looking at these issues from a variety of different perspectives. And you can also get involved in our seminar series that will be linked to that research methodology. We're going to have a series of weekly seminars interrogating key issues in internet governance, but also highlighting different methodologies for uncovering those issues. So we hope you join us in the fall once that seminar series starts, and join us for some of the workshops that we'll have along with that as well. So thank you very much for talking about the future, and I look forward to communicating with all of you as we go forward. So thank you. I would now like to introduce our closing commenter. So Dean Rutenbeck joined AU in June 2012, and he's focused his energies on growing the campaign for the School of Communication and building an established partnership to expand the dean's internships, launch a new investigative journalism practicum with the Washington Post, join the first DC area team to enter the DOE Solar Decathlon, and launch an initiative with the College of Arts and Sciences to develop a center for persuasive gaming at AU. And this innovative game lab has been getting all kinds of attention as they start to go into their new space on New Mexico. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dean Rutenbeck.
Thank you so much, Derrick. And just listening to the parts of the conversation I was able to hear, I was reflecting on talk about internet research 20 years ago or even longer ago, and that strange feeling that academics often have that we're interested in things few people know about or care about, and how different it is now, of course. But there's a double-edged challenge there, because now so many people feel like they know about the internet but actually know so little. And it's interesting to hear about all the momentum here, and really we do have so much opportunity and we have such great talent here. So congratulations to the team on the book, and should I say on the books. All right, this is like a franchise now, right? It's really growing. And then also to thank our guests, Kathy Brown and Emma Llansó and Fiona Alexander. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And we really are talking about potentially the biggest technological and public policy problems in human history. And not just the challenges of a generation, but for generations to come. we know how dependent we are on this technology, and we know that there are no media systems, no commercial systems, no community engagements or financial systems, transportation, all of it is so directly connected. And so we need you, the world needs you desperately to help chart the course and figure out the way forward. We called this event the Internet at a Crossroads because we do indeed have choices ahead. The future of the Internet is not certain, and the policy and technical choices we make now will determine which future we choose. So will private conversations between two people be possible in the digital age? Will massive data breaches continue to erode trust in the network? Will the next billion people that Derrick talked about coming online have access to all the knowledge or only part of it? Will open technologies prevail, or will proprietary business models enclose cyberspace? And will the digital public sphere be marked by censorship and mass surveillance, or by open and secure information flows? These and many more questions will chart the future of all of our lives. They require, right now, interdisciplinary lens and empirical research that can provide that evidentiary basis for policy matters and decisions. And again, so great to hear about the new project on research methods. Seems like a perfectly timed contribution. So this is why we're so thrilled to have the Internet Governance Lab and the Internet, this critical mass of star players in these conversations here at AU and affiliated with the work that's going on at AU. Derrick mentioned the AU 2030 projects, and if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the range of those efforts, they've been transformative in the research and intellectual culture here at American University. And the Internet governance work is perhaps one of the best examples of that transformed culture. We are already known as a global institution providing thought leadership and service in this area, but we are especially excited about this growing collective vision, I think, that we're now starting to hear. So stay tuned. A few thank yous. I love being the person that gets to thank people. Also thanking the people who have made today possible. So Maya Aguilar, Amy Gillespie, Kay Summers. Kay, is Kay here? Ann Deakins, Danny Rizzo. I know Danny's probably out there digging up this is Campus Beautification Day, so there's a lot of beautification going on out there. John Zollinger and Elizabeth Hertzfeld-Kamprath for making a terrific launch video. I don't know if you've seen that yet. The DC chapter of the Internet Society, and especially David Viorst. Is David here? Yay, David. Thank you. The ACS captioning, let's just make it required for everything, please. And our stellar speakers, of course, Fiona, Kathy, and Emma. Thank you again for being here. And then to all of you, this is what makes this such a great place to be. Syracuse joke aside, this will be happening on a weekly basis next semester, so keep in touch. And again, thank you to Derrick and Laura and Nanette and Francesca for their amazing work. So thanks everyone for coming.